big round of applause to Anna Ravik and Henrik Freias, who are here from Paradox to talk about Stellaris. I hope you've got a bunch of... I said clap. They're here, yes. Or I could have just paused and given them time to clap, which is probably my fault. I hope you've got a bunch of questions, because I think you guys are going to do a little Q&A at the end. If there's anything you guys want to know, so store up your questions, and yeah, we'll see you in a few minutes. Great. Thanks, guys.
Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a presentation of the grandest strategy game ever set in space. How many of you have played a Paradox strategy game before?
A couple, that's nice.
Yeah,
right.
The majority. Good. Then you know what a grand strategy game is all about. And if you don't know, you will hear Henrik go through it later. So, Henrik Freias is a game veteran who has worked on several titles that are historical strategy games, such as Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis, and Crusader Kings, where he was the lead designer. Currently, he works as game director at Paradox Development Studios, and he focuses on the work on Stellaris, as well as upcoming Crusader Kings expansions for the moment. In May 2013, the first piece of actual work was made on Stellaris. One person was working in the team by then. And since then, the team has grown a lot. And compared to our previous games, we have invested more effort than ever into the graphics and audio of this game. Now we're in the later stage of development, which means that we are currently fixing bugs, tweaking the game, and doing balancing. We want Stellaris to be the most accessible game that Paradox Development Studios has released so far. That means we want it to be easy to learn, but we still want to give our fans a challenge in the game, which is super important for us. So prepare your science ships, because Henrik is now going to show you how to spend more than a lifetime in space. And this is the first time, except from yesterday, that the game is shown to people who are not journalists. So feel privileged.
Thank you, Anna. Well, if you've played Paradox games, you probably know what to expect. Although Stellaris for us is in many ways a completely new thing and a big challenge, because we're known for making historically accurate, fairly hardcore strategy games, where you start as an actual country in an actual period in time. So for example, you can start as France in 1456, and the world is going to look like it did. And France is, of course, going to be more powerful than if you were playing, say, Luxembourg or something like that. So Stellaris is obviously a big departure for us. It's set in the future, so it can't be historically accurate. And we had to come up with new systems and not try to model historical events and so on. I would classify Stellaris as a 4X game, but also as a grand strategy title. So it's kind of a hybrid for us. It's not on as grand and vast a scope as a game like Europa Universalis, but it's still grander than perhaps most other 4X games that you have played before. Now, I read a preview of the game where it was actually classified as an MMO. I have no idea where that journalist got that from. It's definitely not an MMO. However, it does support multiplayer for at least 32 players. Probably more, but that's the only thing we can guarantee, is that it works well for 32 people. And we have spent a lot of effort making it work well in multiplayer. It has functioning hot joins, so you can just jump into an ongoing game, and it has a nice multiplayer lobby and so on. My vision for this game is that it should have infinite replayability. That's really important for me. And that's kind of a guiding principle that I've had for all of our games, or at least all the games I worked on, like Crusader Kings and so on. So I really see it as an opportunity when we can actually create a random galaxy every time you start a new session. So not just the galaxy that you start in, the world, will be different every time. The species, the aliens you meet in the universe will also be different. And the stories you encounter, the various little quests and anomalies that you face in the game should all be new and fresh every time you begin a new game, basically. Now I prepared a little save game here that I'm going to start up. So in this game, I'm actually playing us, the humans, and
Is it possible?
tend to anticipate that most people will play as the humans in Stellaris. But we'll see. We do have telemetry, so we'll probably find out if that's true or not. Stellaris is a pausable real-time game, as you can see. It's not turn-based. I can start it up and increase or decrease the speed level. This is a very handy format for us. It's worked out well in all of our games. And it also means that our games can be quite multiplayer friendly, because you don't need to wait for the other people to finish their turns or anything like that. You just agree on a speed, suitable speed level, so that everyone can do whatever they want to do and give orders and so on. So in this game, I'm playing as the humans. Here is our glorious president, Dolores Mwanga. She has some personality traits. The empire I'm playing has certain ethics, and that's an important choice you make at the start of the game. In this case, I'm playing as a fanatic, individualist, xenophile empire. And this will determine a lot of mechanics in the game. So if I'm playing a militarist empire, I will get special militarist powers, and if I'm playing a pacifist, I will kind of tend to get diplomatic abilities and powers in the game. This is also very important because it ties into what I mentioned about replayability. There should be many different ways of playing Stellaris. So your choice of ethics really matter. I'm also an indirect democracy in this game. That's basically a parliamentary democracy, which means that my president here will be re-elected or replaced at regular intervals in the game.
Henrik, would it be possible for us to turn up the volume of the music a little bit?
Of the game? Yeah, let's see if we can do that. A little bit.
Right.
There we go.
Better.
So this is my home planet. This is Earth, and colonized planets are really the center of the economy, everything you're fighting for in this game. It is a strategy game, so it's really all about conquering the galaxy and expanding into the unknown. Every colonized planet has an abstract map of sorts. As you can see here, there are certain map tiles, and this is where I build my buildings and where my population grows. So for example, I can build hydroponics farms to make food. I can build mineral buildings to give me minerals and so on. But the real trick to this system is the population. It's a kind of familiar concept to anyone who has played, say, Civilization, but our population units, or POPs as we call them, are a little bit more involved in that. So if you played a game like Victoria, you should be a bit more familiar with how it works. In this case, they start out as the guiding ethics that I have, so each population unit has an ethic that corresponds to my empire. But as my empire grows bigger and bigger, they will tend to diverge. So colonies far away, my population will tend to get different ethics and even genetic traits as they modify themselves to suit the environment. And this is quite important because, let's see, here we are. Population units will tend to organize themselves into political movements or factions. And this is an important part of the internal gameplay in the game. So at the start, all population units are basically loyalists. I should probably turn down the music a little bit. So all population units are loyalists at the start of the game. But then I will need to start managing all these diverse movements in my empire, especially if I start integrating aliens and so on. Characters, or planets also have characters. In this case, it's a governor, Sienna Reinhardt. Characters in Stellaris are not quite as involved as they are in Crusader Kings 2, for example. They don't get married and have children and marry their siblings and all kinds of fun things. But they do grow old and die. So the characters level up, they gain skill as they work and get older. But unfortunately, they do die at some point, and that's, characters would get overpowered if they just leveled up forever and ever. So one type of character is the governor. Another really important type of character is the scientist. And this is one thing that sets Stellaris apart from many similar games. Is that we have a special type of ship called the science ship, and they are led by a scientist-type character. I like to think of these scientists as basically heroes in a role-playing game. They go out and have little adventures and quests, and you will experience various types of scripted content in the game as well. Now, the simplest mission I can give to the scientist is basically to survey planets, and that's what I did right now. But as they survey planets, they will find not just minerals and resources that I can use on these planets, but they will also find anomalies and what I like to call little side quests almost in the game. And this brings me to the research system in Stellaris. In many strategy games, you would expect to see a technology tree, a predictable tree of technologies. But since I want everything to be new and fresh when you play Stellaris, the system here is slightly more random. So here I have my 3 research departments: physics, society, and engineering. Each department is headed up by a specific scientist character. They all have special character traits. So this one has an expertise in particle physics. Now, she is probably not in the right place, because particle physics, she would probably be better to head up the physics department, but even so. Now, the trick to the technology system in Stellaris is that each time I want to research something new, I'm presented with 3 choices. This is a lot like drawing 3 cards from the top of a deck of cards and then picking one and putting 2 back into the deck. But of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, because the trick, or the magic, if you will, is in the shuffling of the deck. And it's not completely random at all. It's weighted so that, for example, if a character has, or a scientist character has a certain personality trait, it's likelier that certain technologies will end up at the top of the deck, and that way I will be presented with those choices. Of course, the ethics of the empire also plays a part. So if I'm playing a materialist empire, I'm likelier to be presented with like robotics and cybernetics type technologies. Or if I'm playing a spiritualist, it might be telepathy and more exotic things like that. And if my scientist happens to be a lunatic or a mad scientist, I might get really weird things like, orbital mind control lasers or whatever. So some of these technologies are really rare, and some of them are completely unique and cannot be researched normally. I can only get them through experience various adventures out in space. Oh, I also forgot to mention that colonized planets can have a spaceport. This is the spaceport of Earth. It can be expanded, and I can build various modules here, especially if I want to build a tall empire rather than a wide empire, which is a concept we're playing around with in Europa Universalis 4, for example. But I'm going to queue up a few corvettes here. As you can see, I can also build construction ships, science ships, upgrades to the spaceport. This is also where I build colony ships to expand into the universe. But let's see what my scientist will find when I send her out to survey the solar system. I'm going to increase the speed level a little bit, so you'll see what it looks like. So now she's scanning this planet. Oh, we have ongoing elections as well. Not really going to focus on those. As you can see, I just uncovered on Triton a research resource, basically, that I can then build a research station to exploit.
Situation log updated.
We got a new ruler elected, that's nice. But since I'm not finding anything interesting right now, I'm just gonna take a look at this instead, which I found previously. This is something we call an anomaly, and they are uncovered by the research ship's surveying mission that you just saw. This is almost like a little side quest. If this was a role-playing game, this would be a quest, essentially. So you can see it has a skill level. This is, or a difficulty level. So this anomaly is level 2. My scientist has a skill level of 2, and that means that there is a 30% chance of failure if I want to research this anomaly. Now, normally what happens when you fail is just that the anomaly goes away and I will never find out what it was. But there's also a chance of more catastrophic failure. So, if our scripters or content designers have really been creative, it could really be anything from the scientist dying to the ship blowing up to the planet blowing up or being knocked out of orbit. There are actually a few of those, where an asteroid can be knocked out of orbit and put on a trajectory to hit my home planet and so on. So sometimes it's better to wait until your scientist has leveled up before you dare do this. But I'm just going to go ahead and see if we can succeed here. So what's going to happen now is, if I succeed, that is, we're going to see the start of a branching storyline. And this is something that, you know, is close to my heart, is these branching storylines that are always a bit different every time you see them, or at least that's the ambition. Oh, well, fun. All right, I always like when this happens. This did not go as planned, so we actually had a critical failure here. Let's see. So we had a reactor failure, blah, blah, blah. Science officer oversaw the evacuation of the entire crew, but I think she died herself and the ship is gone. So this kind of stuff can happen, but that's okay. So what would have happened if we had succeeded was that this situation would have ended up here in what we call the situation log, which is, again, the direct equivalent of a quest log in a role-playing game. So, for example, it could have been a storyline about the precursor civilization, and we'd need to find some artifacts or dig them up on certain planets to find out more about them. Of course, this really ties into the whole normal gameplay as well. These anomalies will allow me to get some really unique and cool technologies that I can equip my ships with if I want to spend my time doing that. And what characterizes the early game of Stellaris is really that. It's exploring, finding these little anomalies, and gaining certain advantages from that. Of course, you also need to colonize other planets. And as you can see here, this is the close vicinity of the solar system. We have Barnard Star, Alpha Centauri, and so on. And if we zoom out, we can see the entire galaxy, which in this case consists of 1,000 solar systems. For those of us who are familiar with Paradox games, this is an in-joke we have. We always have a comet-sighted event in all of our games, and Stellaris is no different. So, the early game is characterized by colonization, exploration, experiencing these little adventures, but of course also by military conquest. This is a strategy game after all. So let's select my military fleet and assign a leader. Admirals are also a type of character, are quite important to how well your fleets will do in combat. And let's move it to this system where I happen to know we'll find something interesting. Now, I should also talk about how ships move. That's kind of important in the game. In this case, I started the game using warp technology, so the humans in this particular game are free to travel between all solar systems as they like. Warp travel, however, is a bit slower, and it can be interdicted by defensive mechanics. There are two other ways of faster-than-light travel. You have hyperlanes, where you're forced to travel along set paths between the solar systems. And there's wormhole travel, where you need to build wormhole stations near the edges of the solar systems that will open up holes for you to travel through. And here's actually the start of one of our little event chains. It seems the head of the physics department has gone missing. And he also stole a science ship, so we'll see where that takes us. As you might notice, the solar system is divided into two parts, the inner part here and the outer part. And normally, faster-than-light travel happens in this outer edge. Enemy fleets will always arrive near the outer edges of a solar system, and that means that I can tend to predict where they will come in. So this is where I will build military installations to snare them and trap them, and stuff like minefields and so on, which is a tactical layer to the game and makes it more fun, basically. So let's take a look here. Here I can see that the fleet is incoming. In this case, it's my own fleet. You also get these traces when fleets have left. And we also actually have a system where you can track where fleets went by sending a science ship here and analyzing the warp trail. It's used in some of these quests as well. Here's the continuation of this story about the missing head of the science department. All right, I forgot I turned on the advisor system. Turn that off again. All right, so here's a pretty cool feature of Stellaris that I haven't seen really in any other game. when you first meet alien beings, you don't really know what they are at all. So they're just being given a tag or a classification. In this case, they're called the Outers, and that's all I know about them. To find out more, I will have to research them further. So I shouldn't really know, or the point is that you should never really know if this is just some kind of minor faction, some kind of space organism, or if it's another empire proper, until you research them. So here I can try to establish contact with these aliens. And again, this is also done through this situation log. Investigate the Outers. And I'm going to try and do that. If this had been another empire, now I happen to know it isn't, I am perfectly free to attack them until I have established first communications with them. So I can't even see their borders, and I can even invade their home planet and take it. Of course, if I attack them, they will always remember it for the rest of the game. So, it might not always be the best of ideas. But while we're researching them, let's take a look at combat. Now, combat in Stellaris is not tactical. It plays out much like it would in Europa Universalis 4, but it is very visualized. And the point of this is not just to show you some pretty fireworks, it's actually to have you judge the efficiency of your various weapons and defensive systems. So I'm going to put it at slowest speed here so you can see everything play out, basically. So here we are. We have a combat screen, much as in our other games, and you can see how effective all your weapon systems are. My ships are equipped with missiles, in this case, and this being here, or entity, is firing some kind of plasma balls. So, although combat is not tactical, it's quite important how you have designed your ships. And if they're prove very inefficient against a certain enemy, then you will have to go into your ship designer and try and come up with a better design. And here's the ship designer. You can equip your ships with various modules. I only have access to missiles at this point in the game, but it could also be lasers and projectile weapons or really anything. Of course, designing the ships are a bit tricky because you have to keep within the power requirements or the capacity of your reactors, basically. But let's take a look at the outcome. Here's another cool thing. Many ships that are destroyed actually leave debris behind. It's not gonna stick around forever, but I'm gonna have an opportunity to send my science ship here to research this debris. And the really cool thing about this is, of course, that this is one way of getting these unique technologies. So in this case, those nifty plasma balls that you saw the amoeba shooting, if I send my science ship here, I might get access to that technology and be able to equip my ships with that kind of unique weapons system. So, I have shown you now the early game, and unfortunately I won't be able to show you the mid-game, so I'm going to have to talk about it. But at least we can observe what the galaxy actually looks like at the start here. So Stellaris is not quite on the same scope as Europa Universalis, where you would have hundreds of different nations, but you will at least be competing against like 50 or so in the biggest type of galaxy. The mid-game of Stellaris turns into more and more of a grand strategy game. That is, the early game looks like a 4X, and the mid-game is more like Europa Universalis, for example. And one of the differences, I would say, between our games and those of other companies is that our diplomacy tends to be fairly deep and complex. So, for example, in a Paradox game, if you declare war on someone, you typically have to say why. Why are you declaring war? What are you after? What are your goals? And in Stellaris, it's the same way. If I have a good reason to invade someone, if one of my population units lives on another planet or a target planet, then that gives me a reason basically to take that in the war. So I send my armies there, I invade that planet, and that doesn't mean it's immediately mine. However, I'll still have to negotiate for it in the peace. So even if I've occupied an enemy planet, they might be destroying my fleets elsewhere, and that means I can't really take it in that war. It's a very paradoxy way of doing things, We also have, of course, various levels of control over other empires. I can vassalize them. I can have them as tributaries, or I can form an alliance with them. We can have various treaties like migration treaties, research treaties, and various levels of access like military and civilian access. So the mid-game is going to be more static than in old school 4X games and more like a Paradox game. Probably going to last longer too. You can also see some special features here in the galaxy. Although the start in Stellaris is symmetrical, everyone starts out equal on one solar system, there are exceptions. So for example, this here is what we call a fallen empire. These are very technologically advanced empires that used to be very powerful and real galactic players, but for some reason they started turning inwards, a bit like China in medieval times. So they might have even forgotten how to use their own technologies, but they are very powerful at the start. So while you can negotiate with them and communicate with them, they won't be expanding. They can, however, be attacked. Or I should say, they won't be expanding unless something extraordinary happens that wakes them up, which is also possible. Other galactic features are pre-FTL civilizations that exist on certain planets. These are basically pre-space age civilizations, and your choice of ideology at the start of the game determines how you want to deal with them. So if you're playing pacifists, you can build an observation post in orbit around these planets where you can study them for some society technology. If you're xenophobe or something, you can be more aggressive about it and study them aggressively, abducting them, mutilating their cattle, whatever, probing them. Of course, if they ever achieve FTL, they will never like you much for doing that to them. And of course, if you're playing a fanatic militarist, you can just invade and take them over, integrating their population into your own empire. And speaking of features like that, one of my favorite science fiction novels is the Uplift series by David Brin. And in that, one of the main concepts basically of the story is that various old civilizations find pre-sentient animals like gorillas and dolphins and so on, and genetically modify them to uplift them to sentience. And that's another feature we have in the game. Humans like to live on continental planets, for example. It's a continental world. But in order to expand onto other types of planets, I'm probably going to be forced to integrate aliens, uplift these animals, dolphins or gorillas that actually like to live there, or use robots or something like that. It's quite hard to terraform planets in Stellaris. And one of the reasons is I simply don't like games where you eventually end up owning every single planet in every single solar system. So each inhabitable planet should be precious and unique, essentially. I think I also forgot to mention these tile blockers that you can find on planets. On home planets at the start of the game, they're quite simple. It can be things like industrial wastelands, sprawling slums, and so on. And you just need to pay some money and minerals to get rid of them. But on alien planets, these can be really strange things. It could be aggressive flora that spreads like a kudzu plant almost into the other tiles, and you need to complete a research project to find out how to deal with that. It could also be a giant sinkhole in the ground, which can later, at any given point in the game, spawn something. Something climbs out from the subterranean world, and that's a situation you will have to deal with. Or it can be an alien mysterious obelisk that mind controls your population units and so on. So there are a lot of features like that that should make every planet feel unique, apart from various planet modifiers that can also exist. Right, that's the mid-game, galactic features, cool. Then eventually you will probably reach the end game. And in Stellaris you can actually achieve victory, which you really can't in Europa Universalis 4 or CK2. So there are various victory conditions. But one of my pet peeves with many strategy games is that there usually comes a point where you realize that you have already won and there is no point going on, it's just going to be a mop-up operation. And I really hate it when that happens, and it's quite common in really the games we've made before as well, that you grow tired of your empire and just stop playing after a while. And with 2 countermeasures in place in Stellaris. I've already talked about the factions and the fact that population can gather into political movements that you will have to deal with. Another thing we've done is related to that, is that you can only control so many planets directly yourself, usually 5. Past that, you will need to assign them to a type of vassals, and this is most similar to Crusader Kings 2, where you can only control so many provinces yourself, and your feudal vassals will control the rest. In this case, we call them administrative sectors, and they're governed by these planetary sector governors. Of course, they will also want more power and autonomy as the game goes on. I'll switch back here. Which will give you a lot of internal gameplay to keep track of. And the other, here's the planetary governor. The other thing we put in place is something we call late game crises or end game crises. And they're usually tied to some technology. So there are certain technologies that are marked as being dangerous. For example, we all know what happens when robots gain too much sentience, right? You know, it's kind of those classic scenarios, Cylon uprisings. And we do have that. Robot pops are very useful. Many empires will start using them to live on other types of planets, especially. But if you go too far into AI technology, there is a risk that somewhere in the galaxy, one of these AI revolts will happen. And that will threaten everyone. And these robot pops will band together across nation borders to become a galactic threat. So you never really know, even if you feel that you won the game already and you control like 1/4 of the galaxy, if something interesting is going to happen near the end. So you have the robot revolts. There can also be like extragalactic invaders that come in from the side and threaten everyone. And an interesting tactical choice is, of course, are you going to band up against them, or are you going to let them take out your most dangerous enemies first and then try and take them on yourself? Of course, that's a very dangerous approach because they tend to snowball very quickly. One thing I think I forgot to talk about was federations, which is pretty cool as well. In true Star Trek fashion, more pacifist-bent empires can choose to band up and share a victory together, especially in the face of large, dangerous empires. So if I'm playing one of 4 smaller space empires, we can form a federation together. The cool thing about federations is that only one of these countries, say these 4, is the federation president, and this position rotates between the member states. The federation president controls foreign policy, like declaring wars and so on, and also has control over the joint federation fleet, which is a bit like if you imagine that the UN had its own task force or fleet, except that you can build it using all the best technologies of all the member states. So federations have a technological edge over other empires, but unfortunately, you will need to share your victory with other member states. I don't like that myself. I prefer a straight conquest victory where I just win and feel that I dominated everyone, but maybe that's my own personal taste. We do have some other victory conditions. There's an archaeological victory, which is related to these situations. If you really delve far enough into these, you can win that way as well, uncovering the secrets of the ancients and so on. Can't say more about those victory conditions we have because we're still working on the rest, but there will be several ways of winning. So I think that's all I had to say.
Yes. And the Stellaris game session that you just experienced here might turn out completely different when you play it yourselves. Depending on the choices and decisions you make, and the countless number of unique alien species meetings. And the alien species can look very differently. What you just saw were humans here, but we also have aliens resembling something bird-like, aliens looking like they have been hiding in the deepest part of the sea for millions of years. A lot. And in Stellaris, it's your turn to establish first contact with undiscovered civilizations. If your cup of tea is forming alliances and trading your way towards conquest, go ahead. If you're a more xenophobic type, you might want to use force to destroy your enemies and make them the vassals of yours. In Stellaris, the possibilities are endless. So go out there and discover what happens in a universe where unexpected events lurk around every corner. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Should we throw it open to a few questions if anyone's got any questions out there? Yeah, you do.
You showed off a little bit of the shipbuilding. In terms of the kind of things that you can put on your ships, how many of them are kind of unique modifiers to how the ship works entirely, things like boarding pods or stuff like that, and how many would you say are kind of numerical modifiers?
Well, we have a lot of unique stuff. We have fighter base, for example. We have all kinds of defensive systems like shields. We even have snares for FTL that you can put on space stations and so on. I talked a little bit about that before, where you kind of prevent ships from emergency jumping away using warp and so on. So there are quite a few different types. Many graphical versions of weapons effects. Of course, it all depends on the defensive systems of the other ships as well. You know, what's effective against shields, armor, and so on.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, gentleman over here.
About federations, can they be dissolved, first of all?
Yes, of course, yeah. Okay. You're free to leave a federation at any point, basically. Of course, the other members will kind of remember that. Opinion modifiers are a big thing in all of our games, so you should expect that you haven't made any friends, really.
Okay, so then what happens to the fleet, the Federation fleet?
The Federation fleet, if the Federation completely dissolves, also dissolves. But you retain your national fleets in addition to the Federation fleet, basically.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. Yes. With the Robocop t-shirt at the back.
Oh yeah, it's very loud. I was just wondering about fail states. So, sort of in Crusader Kings 2, you would lose if your dynasty was wiped out. How does that play out in this game?
Well, it's a lot simpler here. It's basically losing your last planet is game over. So.
Oh, that was short. Any other questions? Ah, yes.
So you said at the beginning that all the different empires start off the same. Is there any mechanism for new empires to arise and join the game after the start?
Yeah, I kind of forgot to talk about that, but these factions are really important because, you know, sometimes they demand autonomy. So you can expect to see a lot of civil wars going on and a lot of blobs falling apart because they've taken on too much to handle, basically. Of course, you can usually meet them like halfway. So if a faction wants autonomy, you can choose to give them a vassalage instead and make them a vassal state, which would then make them fairly happy, but of course, it risks breaking loose completely later on. You can also support, as an outside power, someone's quest for independence to try and break down enemy realms that way.
Oh, yes. This is my go-to question guy all day.
Don't talk me out. Okay. I'm just wondering about your AI. You haven't talked a lot about AI, but what differences would there be in the AI between different sort of, different AI civilizations?
Well, the AI has a personality that is mostly based on these ethics you pick for your empire at the start of the game. So it tends to behave in accordance with its visible personality, and of course its opinion modifiers that it gets in the game for various reasons. So.
One last question. Go on, now's the time.
You were saying about how at the end of the game it gets quite heated and big things can change it. Do you have things like super weapons like Death Stars and stuff like that?
We're saving the super weapons for an expansion, to be honest. But we have talked a lot about stuff like that, Dyson spheres, Death Stars, and so on. But it's a bit imba as well, so it's kind of hard to do it right. But it's something we want to do at some point.